Before tanks, before rifles, before even the concept of a standing army as we know it, there was a weapon that didn't wear armor or hold a sword, yet struck fear deeper than any blade. It didn't speak Latin, but it obeyed like a soldier. The enemy didn't just run from it, they remembered it in nightmares. This weapon was alive, and it had teeth. This is the story of the Roman war dog, the canis pugnax, and what you're about to hear will change how you think of ancient warfare forever. The Roman Empire didn't invent war, but they perfected it. Their weapons were sharp, their tactics ruthless, but what set them apart was how they combined intelligence with intimidation. Enter the canis pugnax, massive, muscle-bound dogs that weren't just trained to fight, they were born for it. Their lineage begins not in Rome, but in the rugged mountains of Epirus, Greece. They're a breed called the Molossian hound, roamed ferocious, fast, and fiercely loyal. These weren't your average village dogs. These were beasts that hunted bears and fought wolves. And when Rome set its sights on domination, it took more than gold and land, it took animals. The Romans saw the Molossian's potential and crossbred it with other powerful types, creating something new, something terrifying. Something they called canis pugnax, the fighting dog. But this dog wasn't just muscle and bark, it was bred with military purpose. Strength, yes, but also endurance, obedience, and uncanny intelligence. The Romans didn't just want a monster, they wanted a soldier, so they trained it like one. Imagine a beast the size of a modern mastiff, but leaner, faster, wrapped in leather armor with metal spikes along the back. Imagine that beast charging toward a line of panicked infantry, jaws open, eyes locked, ignoring swords, spears, fire, anything that wasn't its target. But it wasn't only about brute force. The Romans taught these dogs to stay in formation, to respond to hand signals, and to guard encampments with eerie silence. These weren't dogs barking in chaos. These were creatures of control. They'd stand motionless for hours, eyes scanning, waiting for the signal. And when it came, they became war incarnate. The canis pugnax was also a psychological weapon. Enemies unfamiliar with the beast would freeze at its growl. Some ran before battle even began. There are whispers from Germanic tribes and Celtic warriors who claimed they feared the dog more than the Roman sword, because at least the sword didn't come in the night. At least the sword didn't chase you into the woods, rip through tents, and vanish before dawn. And perhaps the most terrifying part, these dogs weren't just bred for loyalty, they were bred for sacrifice. Many were trained to die with their handler if needed. They would stand over a fallen legionary, snarling at any who approached. Some reports say they even dragged injured soldiers back toward camp, refusing to abandon them. This wasn't just loyalty, it was code, and Rome rewarded it with armor, grooming, and a place in military ranks. These weren't pets, they were comrades. But this was only the beginning, because once Rome realized what these animals could truly do, they stopped treating them like dogs. They turned them into legends. Before the clash of steel, before the war horns blared, there were other places where Rome showcased its power, not on the battlefield, but in the blood-soaked sand of the arena. And when Rome needed the crowd to scream, to gasp, to tremble, they brought out the dogs, but not just any dogs. They brought out the canis pugnax. What began as a tool of war quickly became a spectacle of violence. Rome wasn't just an empire of conquests, it was an empire of control. And control came through fear, through awe, through unforgettable displays of dominance. So the very dogs that had been molded into war machines were now paraded through colosseums to show citizens and enemies alike just what Rome could create. In the gladiator arenas, canis pugnax took on roles more savage than even some of the warriors. They were unleashed against wild animals, lions, bears, leopards brought in from across the empire, but the dogs didn't flinch, they didn't hesitate, they launched with terrifying precision, trained not just to fight but to perform. Imagine the chaos, the roar of 50,000 spectators, the metallic scent of blood in the air, and from the shadows a low growl as a beast armored in steel prowls into view. The audience rises, they've heard rumors, they've seen wounds, but seeing this animal in the flesh, its eyes cold, its breathing measured, it was a different kind of fear. And when the gates opened and the lion pounced, it wasn't a fair fight, it was a lesson. Sometimes they faced men, criminals, enemies of the state, prisoners from distant provinces. The crowd cheered not just for justice, but for entertainment. The canis pugnax didn't kill out of rage, it executed, swift, calculated, and unrelenting. And when it was done, it didn't howl, it sat, waiting for the next command. But these dogs weren't bred for show. The arena was just a stage. The real value Rome knew was in what they did when the empire's survival was at stake. So the most elite canis pugnax were never caged for sport. They were kept close to commanders, assigned to elite cohorts. And when legions crossed into enemy lands through forests, mountains, icy rivers, it wasn't always a man who walked at the front, it was a dog. And these weren't just scouts, these were silencers. The canis pugnax could detect ambushes long before the first arrow flew. They sniffed out traps, tracked fleeing enemies, and defended supply caravans at night when human soldiers needed rest. In unfamiliar territory, they were the first to sense danger and the last to retreat from it. There are Roman scrolls and accounts that describe these dogs chasing down deserters, men who abandoned their post, thinking they could vanish into the wild, but the dog always found them and brought them back, sometimes alive, sometimes not. To the Romans, this wasn't cruelty, it was efficiency. The canis pugnax wasn't a tool, it was part of the system, a cog in the war machine, and like any legionnaire, it followed orders without hesitation. What's more, these dogs didn't just serve in life. Some were buried alongside their masters, given full honors, shield by their side, names etched into stone, because to the men who marched into hell with them, they weren't beasts. They were brothers. And yet, even as their legend grew, a question loomed. What happens when an empire starts to forget the very creatures that helped build it? Because power is never permanent, and neither is memory. But the canis pugnax, it wasn't done making history just yet. The enemies of Rome were changing. No longer just tribal skirmishes or coastal rebels, they were organized, brutal, and unafraid. Rome needed more than formations and fear. It needed something unpredictable, something unstoppable. So it unleashed the canis pugnax into the farthest corners of the empire, Germania, Britannia, Dacia, places where war was wild and nothing could be trusted, except the dog at your side. This is where the canis pugnax became legend, not just among Romans, but among the very enemies they were sent to destroy. Imagine you're a Roman scout deep in misty forests, days from the nearest road. It's silent, too silent. Your men grip their weapons tighter, breath caught in their throats. Then the dog stiffens, ears twitch, it smells them. A dozen barbarian warriors hidden behind trees, blades drawn. Before you can speak, the dog launches. The first scream cuts through the woods, not yours, theirs. It's already ripped through the ambush before the arrows even fly. Your unit rallies, striking down attackers that never thought they'd be seen. And when it's over, the dog returns, bleeding, panting, victorious. It doesn't ask for praise, it simply waits for the next order. That's what made canis pugnax invaluable, not just its bite but its mind. These weren't mindless beasts. They understood terrain, human behavior, even enemy tactics. When other animals panicked in fire and noise, canis pugnax adapted. They fought through blizzards in Gaul, scaled rocky mountain passes in Hispania, and marched days without food or rest. They didn't follow the legions, they led them. Some commanders even altered their strategies around the dogs. The presence of canis pugnax in a camp meant tighter security, more aggressive raids, and deeper patrols. Roman engineers crafted new armor sets specifically for dogs, plated chest guards, spiked collars, even lightweight helmets. In some elite units, dogs were outfitted with flaming oil pots on their backs, turned into living torches during night raids, meant to sow chaos among sleeping enemies. It was psychological warfare at its peak. Enemy scouts reported attacks not just by men, but by shadows with glowing eyes and armor. Whispers spread of ghost dogs in Roman colors. Mothers in frontier villages told children to behave or the Roman dogs would come in the night. Fear was the currency of empire, and canis pugnax was minted in it. But expansion brings overreach. As Rome stretched thinner, so did its understanding of control. Supply lines faltered, training quality declined. Local commanders began breeding dogs without proper lineage or discipline. The purity of the canis pugnax bloodline diluted. New generations were aggressive but unstable, fierce but unfocused. Worse, they were misused. No longer sacred weapons of war, they were handed off to mercenaries, border patrols, and corrupt officials. Some were used for sport again, others sold to wealthy elites for vanity and status. The same dogs that once guarded emperors were now chained in courtyards of drunk senators. And in this slow decay, the enemy learned. Germanic warbands began developing counter-tactics, smoke bombs to obscure scent, whistles to mimic Roman commands and confuse the dogs mid-battle. In some areas, dogs were targeted first, not out of hatred but fear. The enemy knew if the canis pugnax fell, morale crumbled next. The fall didn't happen overnight, but it came piece by piece. As the empire's borders shrank, so did the memory of its fiercest companion. Records grew scarce, statues crumbled, names were forgotten. And as Rome weakened, so too did its war dogs, scattered, stolen, bred into extinction. But not entirely. Because echoes of the canis pugnax still live on in breeds like the Neapolitan Mastiff, the Cane Corso. Their size, their strength, their gaze, it's not just nature, it's legacy. The same blood that tore through enemy lines now walks in city parks and fields. The war is gone, but the instinct remains. So what happens to a warrior when the war ends? When the trumpet sounds no longer, if you listen closely, sometimes at night, you can still hear it. A growl, a breath, a heartbeat that once shook empires. You walk into a museum, rows of gleaming weapons, bronze helmets, cracked marble busts of long-dead emperors. But in the corner behind faded glass sits something different. A collar, thick leather, reinforced with bronze studs. Etched into the rim, barely legible, two Latin words, pugnax fidelis, faithful fighter. Most pass it by without a glance. But what they're ignoring is a piece of Rome's fiercest soldier. A warrior who never took a single vow, never received a crown, and yet died more Roman than the generals who commanded him. This is how the Canis pugnax lives today, fragmented, forgotten, but not erased. Modern archaeologists have uncovered more than just weapons in ancient ruins. Grave of dogs buried with military honors, bones scarred by blade and spear, dog skeletons found in perfect formation beside fallen soldiers. Some even had Roman tags, small metal pendants bearing names, ranks, even unit assignments. These weren't pets, they were comrades in arms, and the fact that Rome honored them in death tells us what they meant in life. Some tombs even featured statues. A few depict large, broad-chested dogs in seated positions, eyes forward, ears alert. Inscriptions call them custos, guardian, bellator, warrior, and fideles, faithful. One slab found in northern Italy reads, "He did not speak, but he knew. He did not beg, but he gave. He died before me as a soldier should." But for all the fragments recovered, there's no single monument to the Canis pugnax, no grand statue in Rome, no festival to their memory. As centuries passed, their role was absorbed into myth, then faded into nothing more than footnotes in dusty military treatises. Meanwhile, the empire itself fell slowly, painfully, under the weight of corruption and time. And yet, the dog lived on. Not in the same form, but in echoes. The cane corso, today known as a loyal guard dog in southern Italy, shares the bone structure, temperament, and endurance of the Canis pugnax. So does the Neapolitan Mastiff, with its sagging jowls and thunderous gait. Even modern war dogs, used in special forces units around the world, owe a silent debt to their Roman ancestors. Because the concept hasn't changed, not really. A soldier who doesn't question, who doesn't hesitate, who protects without praise and fights without fear. Whether it's in the alleys of ancient Gaul or the deserts of modern war zones, the spirit remains. The Canis pugnax wasn't just a tool of war, it was Rome's mirror. Relentless, controlled, brutal when necessary, loyal until death. And in an age where human memory is fleeting, what endures are symbols. The eagle on the legion's banner, the laurel on the emperor's head, and somewhere in the dark corners of forgotten shrines, the paw print carved in stone. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of the Canis pugnax is not its extinction, but how quietly we let it happen. So the next time you see a military dog in uniform, remember, this isn't new, this isn't modern, this is ancient, this is legacy, this is history repeating not by accident but by instinct. Because once, thousands of years ago, a dog didn't just guard a camp, he guarded an empire. And in the shadows of that empire's ruins, his spirit still watches.